This week, on the video version of The Business of Tech, continued changes in employee sentiment in the Great Resignation, Microsoft raises Microsoft 365 and Office 365 pricing, are insurance companies nearing their limits with ransomware up and hiring harder? What were the outcomes from the meeting at the White House? California's Prop 22 ruled unconstitutional, the overwhelming demand for broadband investment, and provider revenue, collaboration, and device data paint the market picture. All these and more stories. Hit that like and subscribe button, and here are this week's stories. PwC surveyed employee priorities regarding the future of work. More than a quarter, at 28% of employees and executives, strongly agree they are making permanent changes to how and where work gets done based on lessons learned from the pandemic. Almost 20% of all employees surveyed said they want to remain fully remote beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. The majority prefer a hybrid model where they're working a few days in the office and a few remote days, the survey found. And 65% of employees are currently looking for a new job, up from 36% in May. Top reasons: more flexible schedules, expanded benefits, and higher compensation. This list doesn't line up with what companies are offering, things like company values, culture, and location flexibility. The survey also found 2 out of 3 of both execs and employees favor vaccine mandates. And another tidbit, nearly half of executives said they want to reduce their dependence on employees' institutional knowledge. 88% of executives were seeing comparatively high turnover, adding that the competitive war for talent has never been more fierce. That remote work benefit is real. Hubble HQ's survey has 79% of respondents saying the best thing about remote work was the lack of commute. Meanwhile, Apple has also announced a delay in the return to the office until January 2022 at the earliest, citing the Delta variant. The company has committed to a 1-month notice before requiring employees to return to the office. Why do we care? The competitive war over talent. And let's highlight that for IT service providers, this is the largest expense line item by far. In the current market, in my if I owned an MSP perspective, there's 2 takeaways for me. First, I'd really be looking at my competitive offerings to my staff. Do I pay enough? Are my benefits in line with what employees want, particularly around schedule flexibility and around benefits? Second, this is where IT companies can offer assistance to the business side of their customers. How can the technology stack be used to address this need? The consulting alone around this need is pretty expansive. There's opportunity here, and take advantage of being agile and smaller where you can. Microsoft is raising the price of Microsoft 365 and Office 365 commercial packages. These new prices will be effective March 1st, 2022. Consumer and education offerings and the E5 SKU are not impacted with this announcement. Increases range from $12 per user on Business Basic to $48 per user per year on E3. Analysts believe the move could be a $5 billion windfall for the company. While on Microsoft, the company has released guidance on securing Windows 365 cloud PCs. The list includes limiting local administrator rights, security baselines using Endpoint Manager, and Azure AD conditional access, including multi-factor authentication. Now, why do we care? Of course they're raising the price. That's to be expected. One of the key lessons for any subscription price is to periodically review it and ensure it's priced to the market. Additionally, regularly adjusting pricing is normal, and many IT providers don't do it often enough. Any provider considering bemoaning this should take this opportunity to consider their own approach to price increases. Microsoft is positioning rebundling, the offer of more products in the suite, as a way to charge more. That's a natural way to raise prices. On Wednesday, Poly released a report highlighting employee multitasking habits during video calls, the social drawbacks of the format, and more. As you might expect, the use of video calls has surged from 2 hours weekly in video meetings to 10, and 22% of respondents report allocating half or more of their work week in video meetings. While employees are spending a comparatively large part of their work week in meetings, they may not be giving their full undivided attention. For instance, 85% reported multitasking in video meetings, and 44% said they do so very frequently or always. Overall, they're checking email, 77%, other work-related tasks, 74%, and pursuing news and social media outlets as topping the list of activities for multitaskers. During video calls, 1/4 of respondents listed personal connection as their greatest challenge, and more than half of respondents reported these sentiments about one-on-one video meetings. Meeting fatigue was another top challenge for 37% of respondents. Now, why do we care? There's a skill to running meetings. Effective ones take more than simply putting people in a room, and virtual ones are no different. Similar to the first story of the day, companies that invest in education on how to be effective will see benefits, and providers who offer those skills will reap rewards. There's a whole business model here in training, which are natural extensions of a typical managed services provider offering, and one that adds that elusive business value. Proofpoint and the Ponemon Institute say the cost of phishing attacks has tripled since 2015. T-Mobile announced a breach last week. More than 40 million people had records stolen. The attack is noted as a straightforward data theft one with an intention to sell the data. Another group claims to have stolen 70 million users worth of data from AT&T. The company has denied the breach. This breach, too, to sell the data. Microsoft, too, feeling their name close to a data breach. This one related to data leaks from a COVID-19 contact tracing database in Indiana with the use of Power Apps, exposing 37 million data records. Key to this one? Default permissions inadvertently set to incorrectly. Not a vulnerability, and instead what could be termed bad user interface design. Huntress Labs reported on scanning Microsoft Exchange servers. In tracking about 1,900 Exchange servers, all are missing patches for at least 2 active exploits. The Verge has a piece covering research on hospital ransomware attacks. CISA has been able to show that hospitals did worse on patient care when navigating a cyberware attack than in hospitals that didn't. 2 more CEOs of insurance companies have cited price increases and are worried about them. AIG's CEO said rates raised 40%, and Chubb's CEO noted that price raises still don't reflect the risk of a catastrophic cyber event. Quoting Cyberscoop, ransomware now accounts for 75% of all cyber insurance claims, up from 55% in 2016, according to the credit ratings agency AM Best. The percentage increase in claims is outpacing that of premiums, said a June report which concluded that the prospects for the cyber insurance market are grim. Fitch Ratings in April found that the ratio of losses to premiums earned was at 73% last year, which is jeopardizing the profitability of the industry. Client take-up rate, or the proportion of existing clients opting for cyber insurance, rose 46% in 2020, according to the Government Accountability Office. And here's a hiring tidbit for security professionals. Alyssa Miller, a security officer and speaker on cybersecurity, researched entry-level jobs. Almost 3/4 of entry-level job vacancies she looked at ask for a Certified Information Systems Security Professional, CISSP, something which takes years of training, costs money to take an exam, and isn't realistic for someone looking for their first job in the industry. Now, why do we care? Let's work backwards. We need more security expertise, and most organizations and IT providers are going to need to build it. So be realistic about that. Entry-level jobs are needed to train and build more expertise, and requiring a CISSP is not entry-level. The insurance companies are clearly starting to close ranks on this issue. Those rates and loss levels are unsustainable, and policies will begin to be changed. Amid a landscape of impacting business, there's not a lot of data on patient care impacts, so this CISA data, which is still unpublished, will be scrutinized and reviewed. I talk about financial incentives often, so let's look at Axios' coverage on this topic recently. About 100 S&P 500 companies link a portion of short-term incentives for CEOs, similar to annual cash bonuses, to environmental, social, and governance metrics, according to ISS Corporate Solutions. That's up from roughly 68 in 2020. Nearly three-fourths of those metrics are around the workforce, including diversity and inclusion. Banker bonuses in Europe are increasingly being pegged to how firms are contributing to a better society, Bloomberg reported. Now, why do we care? Executive leadership responds to the metrics they're measured on, just like any individual or organization. Early in my career, I learned to always ask what a partner or vendor was compensated on, and it remains a staple of my approach. Is management compensated on profit, on growth, on net new customers? Now, boards are linking issues like the environment and society's large benefits to compensation. This is a huge step for changing the makeup of organizations. My next question is an and, not an or. Businesses have to do more than one thing at a time. Because, and, how are they being compensated around addressing cybersecurity? If one couples research that Wall Street investors have gotten data breach fatigue, because the impact isn't as long-lasting, a share price drop of about 3.5% within 14 days of disclosure, better than the 2019 metric of 7.27 drop. Meaning, breaches are now even less impactful on the other metrics such as profitability or stock price, and thus the indirect statement of, to stay profitable, one must not be breached, is less true. Now, kudos to boards for holding to account on environmental, social, and governance. Will breach prevention make the cut? IT providers should be asking their vendors for sure. Let's start today in the UK. The 2021 impact of COVID-19 on SMEs surveyed by JumpCloud, and US listeners will hear some similarities. There were different attitudes with firms in Greater London, with 72.8% taking steps to mandate vaccinations, compared to just 44.9% in the rest of the country. That also correlated with areas outside of London being less likely to drive vaccinations. The JumpCloud survey found that 53.2% of respondents are currently rethinking the plan to return to the office, and 14.8% have already delayed getting staff back in the office. U.S. data, over 3 in 5 hiring managers would ask the candidate about their vaccination status, with Republicans at 69% more likely to ask than Democrats, 54%, a new study finds. An even percentage, 61%, said that answers to those vaccination questions would impact their ultimate hiring decision, according to a study by online invoicing provider Skynova. The research includes mental health insights too. There's nearly the same concern over mental health as there is physical, 23% to 28%. A survey of 3,500 U.S. workers commissioned by GoodHire, an employment screening service provider, found that more than two-thirds, 68%, would choose remote working over working from an office, a sentiment that's been echoed thoroughly by white-collar workers who have enjoyed the freedom and flexibility of working from home during the pandemic. So hesitant are employees to return to the office, in fact, that 61% of those surveyed said they'd be willing to take a pay cut in exchange for being able to work from home permanently. Some even suggested they'd sacrifice up to 50% of their current wage to do so. More than half of respondents to GoodHire's survey said they would not feel safe heading back into the office because of new coronavirus outbreaks, while 84% said they would want to see mandatory mask wearing, proof of vaccination, capacity limits, and regular sanitizing in place before going into a workplace. 45% of U.S. workers surveyed said they would quit their job immediately or begin searching for a new remote job if they were forced by their employer to return to the office full-time. All this on the heels of the FDA approving the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. Why do we care? These are the real conditions of operating a business right now, and why I spend as much time on these issues as I do. It's all well and good to debate the value of a service like data management, but if you don't have people showing up to work, it really doesn't matter, does it? When I do analysis of companies, I use a view I call the 3 L's: leaders, laggards, and lost their mind. That last one is for groups that just go rogue in ways that will push many customers away. Laggard doesn't mean anything bad. It's simply organizations which are following rather than leading. Leading companies take action and are among first movers. United's CEO spoke to Axios about why they instituted vaccine mandates, because he was tired of watching employees die. Leadership isn't easy, and here's where business leaders are now pushed to make a decision. I think we're entering a stage where sentiment allows a comfortable movement from most business leaders around mandates and reopening plans that are more safely in that laggard category than about taking a bold risk as a leader. That's not a bad thing. The first ever Cisco Provider Elevate 2-day virtual event is September 14th and 15th. Start the journey with thought leaders from around the world. With 55 speakers, 22 educational and interactive sessions, networking happy hours, and a self-assessment to help you grow. I'll be a speaker, and best of all, it's free. Registration link is below in the description, because together we elevate. I talked last week about leaving behind biometric scanners in Afghanistan and how that is opening potential security risks. Politico is highlighting more risks here, quoting their article. For decades, the U.S. government poured money into helping the Afghanistan government build its own surveillance apparatuses, collect data for both a voter registry and national ID system that includes ethnicity info, and set up a homegrown telecommunications sector that stores reams of records on who Afghans have called and where they've been. All of that amounts to a surveillance system that many Afghans objected to under the country's prior U.S.-backed government. Now, reporting for pros, it all begins to the Taliban, and experts warn that all that data could now be used to help the group track and retaliate against Afghans who aided the United States or the former government. Quote, "There's almost no doubt that they've gotten their hands on an enormously valuable trove of information that they can exploit at their leisure," said Thomas Warwick, a former Department of Homeland Security counterterrorism official. And there's responses. Many Afghans are wiping their social media profiles, and some companies are responding. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Clubhouse are all rolling out tools to protect users there, including blocking the ability for non-friends to download their profile picture or see their posts. And if you want to dive deeper, I've included a link to a piece from the New York Times about how the Taliban have built infrastructure for control via social media and how they might use technology to build power. So, why do we care? Anyone interested in thinking about data management as a service, the idea of helping organizations understand what implications of and use of the data collected would be, both positive and negative, should be tracking this story. This is the unintended consequences of data collection. It's a horrible case study playing out in real time, and that's why technologists should care. As I mentioned in the close of the show yesterday, the White House hosted a meeting of top tech leaders to discuss U.S. cyber defenses. Here are some of the outcomes, quoting generously from Tech Republic. NIST will work with businesses to improve the security of the technology supply chain with a goal of teaching organizations how to create more secure technologies. The Industrial Control Systems Cybersecurity Initiative will expand to a second major sector, natural gas pipelines. The first was electric utilities. Apple is working with its suppliers in the U.S. to push mass adoption of multi-factor authentication, security training, vulnerability remediation, event logging, and incident response. Google will invest $10 billion over the next 5 years to expand zero-trust technology, better secure the software supply chain, and enhance security for open-source technologies. IBM plans to train 150,000 people in cybersecurity skills over the next 3 years and team with 20 historically black colleges and universities to set up cybersecurity leadership centers. Microsoft revealed an investment of $20 billion over the next 5 years to push efforts to integrate security by design in technology products. The company also said it will immediately devote $150 million to help federal, state, and local governments upgrade their security defenses and would partner with community colleges and nonprofit organizations on cybersecurity training. Amazon said it would offer the same security awareness training to the public that it already offers its own employees. The company added that it will provide all Amazon Web Services customers with a multi-factor authentication device at no additional cost. Cyber insurance providers also plan to do their part to push security among their customers. Resilience said it would require policyholders to meet a certain level of cybersecurity best practices before receiving insurance coverage. Coalition announced it would freely offer its cybersecurity risk assessment and continuous monitoring platform to any organization. Why do we care? Let's start with the last item. Analysts cited the inclusion of insurance companies, and I will too. That's a big deal. Insurance requirements are a kind of indirect regulation and an obvious way to impose standards. Expect to see a lot more here. None of these announcements are spontaneous. No organization of the kind of size in this room make this up as they go along. So it's clear this was planned and coordinated. That isn't a bad thing. Rules will begin to set the standards, and coordination among all these parties will be required. In this list are both resources for providers, like Amazon's training and NIST's guidance, as well as ideas for offerings. These moves can be replicated at a smaller level for smaller clients. I don't want to miss this one. California judge has ruled Proposition 22, California's most expensive ballot initiative, unconstitutional. California Superior Court Judge Frank Rorsch said in his Friday night ruling last week that the law limits the power of a future legislature to define app-based drivers as workers subject to workers' compensation law, and that Prop 22 was unenforceable in its entirety. Why do we care? Gig workers as a space might seem unrelated to IT services. But there's an emergence of temporary workers, and I'm expecting a rise in nomadic employees too. Workers are less likely to fall into the binary categories of employee or contractor, and thus I'm tracking this space, and I think you should be too. Let's revisit a bit of legislation. In the UK, the government has announced plans to change the data protection and privacy laws in a move away from GDPR to a distinct UK set of laws. Specifics have not been announced, and the next step is consultation in September before exploring those potential laws. The intention is to adopt a common-sense approach that allows the UK to establish data partnerships with the US and other nations, which drew a warning from Brussels. While we're talking legislation, Protocol has a piece digging into multiple moves at the state and local level on tech-related legislation. The theme? Action is happening much more swiftly at this level. All 50 states have some level of cybersecurity breach notifications, and 3 now have privacy laws, with more looking into them. Why do we care? GDPR and its rollout was a big deal for Europe and any technology company from the US doing business there. Now, there will be another set of British laws to contend with. Interestingly, this mirrors the US pattern of laws being implemented at the state level. And with all this, you get more complexity. Sure, that's good from a consulting perspective. I'm less sure it's good from a consumer or user perspective. Helping users navigate is the reason IT services care. I continue to ask, how robust is your process for managing this change and complexity? A number of developments around broadband, starting with this one from Politico. More than 230 communities across 49 states and U.S. territories are seeking part of pandemic relief funds that Congress created in December. This is the $288 million broadband infrastructure program, which took grant applications through August 17th. The amount requested totaled more than 8 times what Congress had granted. The Commerce Department cautioned the high volume of applicants for its broadband infrastructure program will result in a highly competitive vetting of grant applicants. Priority will go to cost effectiveness, those proposing to serve the greatest number of households in an eligible area, and targeting rural areas and those providing internet speeds of at least 100 megabits per second download and 20 upload, which is much faster than the FCC minimum broadband definition, which is 25.3. This continued to play out the next day, also in Politico. It's not just local and state governments looking for investments. A coalition representing schools and libraries is urging Congress to replenish funding for an FCC funding program aimed at boosting connectivity for students, school staff, and library patrons. According to FCC data released on Wednesday, schools and libraries have already submitted requests totaling more than $5.1 billion to pay for 9.1 million devices and 5.4 million broadband connections via applications for the agency's $7.17 billion emergency connectivity fund. In other words, more than 70% of the available funding. 12 states and Puerto Rico submitted requests that total at least $100 million each, with California requesting more than $800 million. The FCC announced it would open a second 15-day application filing window from September 28th to October 13th. Axios is meanwhile reporting on the FCC being left out of the broadband deployment projects. Under fire for how it handled awards in 2020, the agency is investing to get more data and examine how it previously gave awards. Why do we care? Observe there wouldn't be this much demand if broadband in the US was available. Fund a program and see overwhelming demand, there's clearly a massive need. I'll broadly criticize the telco industry here. If you were meeting market demand, which you're clearly not, there wouldn't be this broad a problem. We care because this is a limiting factor to IT services. If the market won't fix the problem, it seems government will need to, and that's why we care. Channel Futures recently ran a quarterly survey for MSPs, comparing recurring revenue in the second quarter of 2021 to the year-ago quarter showed a sharp increase in Q2 from Q1 of this year. About 18% of respondents to the quarterly survey said their recurring revenue increased more than 20% in the second quarter, up from 12% in the first. Additionally, 24% said recurring revenue was up by at least 11% to 20%, compared to 15% in the first quarter. Gartner, meanwhile, says the number of workers using collaboration tools has risen by 44% since 2019, resulting in 80% of workers now using the tools in 2021. The company is also predicting that by 2024, in-person meetings will fall from 60% of enterprise meetings to 25%. Canalys says that second quarter PC shipments in the US rose 17% from the same quarter in 2020. Within the entire market, notebooks performed best with an increase of shipments of 27%, and tablets the worst with a fall of 1%. IDC revised their own PC market predictions down to growth of 14.2% year over year, down from 18.1%. Specifically, notebooks are cited as the main area of growth. Why do we care? Good news that revenue is up for providers, likely bolstered from a positive sentiment in Q2. Let's not assume that's steady. As we know, conditions change quickly, and they already have in Q3. There's clearly some room in the collaboration space, and less for raw growth. I read that number of 80% using tools as an indication of a mature market, and thus any opportunity is less about new deployment and more about making sure those tools are effective and integrated into workflows. That's less technical skills and more business ones, and that's why we care. Two-thirds, 68%, of businesses feel there's a lack of diversity in their technology workforce, but less than half, 46%, are actively addressing the issue within tech teams, according to a Wiley survey of more than 2,000 early career tech workers and 270 business leaders released earlier this month. Half of young tech workers reported leaving or wanting to leave a tech job because the company culture made them feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. Among women of color surveyed, the number increases to 57%. The discomfort among underrepresented tech workers starts early in the hiring process. 6 in 10, 64%, survey respondents believe the technology job recruitment process discriminates against people from minority backgrounds. This all from CIO Dive. Now, why do we care? Several stories this week have been about the workforce, and this is one more dimension, and not one siloed off on its own. Workers aren't just concerned about only one thing, it's the death by 1,000 cuts that gets you. Ignoring this dimension adds another reason for a worker to leave. Or excelling here, even if other areas are still works in progress, may make a difference. Consider this not in isolation, but as part of bringing substance to why individual humans choose to work at your organization. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.